Police were searching for a missing British woman in Tokyo. Then, inside a property linked to a wealthy businessman, they found hundreds of recordings. The woman appeared unconscious, disoriented, unable to understand what was happening to them. The archive stretched back years. This was no longer the search for one missing person. Investigators now faced a far more terrifying question. How many women had come before her? And the center of it all was Joji Obara. To understand how police eventually uncovered this case, we have to go back long before the videotapes, long before the missing woman, and long before the name Joji Obara appeared in newspapers across the world. Because Obara did not come from the kind of background people often expect in stories like this. There was no obvious image of poverty, street violence, or public desperation, at least not on the surface. He was born in Osaka in 1952 in a wealthy family of Korean descent. His father had built a fortune in post-war Japan through business, property, and the entertainment world of pachinko, a gambling-style industry that generated enormous money throughout the country. From an early age, Obara had access to things most people spend their whole lives trying to reach. He had a private education, financial security, respected social circles, and eventually a path toward Keio University, one of Japan's most prestigious institutions. Everything about his life suggested that he was meant to become a successful businessman, a man with status. If someone had met him during those years, they probably would not have seen danger. They would have seen an intelligent, well-dressed young man from a privileged background. His appearance gave him a kind of protection, because people often trust the surface before they question what might be hidden underneath it. After his father's death, Obara inherited substantial wealth and moved deeper into a world of property, cars, money, and private spaces. During Japan's economic boom, that world only expanded. But when the bubble began to collapse, so did much of his financial empire. Properties were lost, debts grew, and the foundation beneath his image of wealth began to crack. Still, Obara continued to move through Tokyo as if nothing had changed. He kept the designer clothes, the expensive cars, the confident speech, and the habits of a man who wanted to be seen as powerful, even when that power was no longer as secure as it appeared. One of the places where that image mattered most was Roppongi. During the 80s and 90s, Roppongi was one of the Tokyo's most famous nightlife districts. It was a place where businessmen, tourists, students, hostesses, and wealthy visitors all moved through the same streets after dark. Bars stayed open until morning. Music echoed from clubs. Foreign voices mixed with Japanese. Luxury cars waited outside crowded venues. To outsiders, it looked glamorous. A bright, restless part of Tokyo that seemed alive, even when the rest of the city was asleep. But behind that image was a world built around temporary encounters. People met strangers, tourists drifted far from home, a young woman worked late into the night. Men with money could buy time, attention, privacy, and silence. In a city of millions, surrounded by noise, movement, and anonymity, it was quite easy for someone to disappear into the crowd. For years, Joji Obara became a familiar face within that environment. He was not a shadowy stranger hiding in alleyways. He was a customer who could speak politely, spend money, and make himself seem harmless. At the time, almost nobody understood what kind of man was moving through Roppongi night after night. And nobody could have imagined how many women could be affected before anyone finally stopped him. By the early 90s, Joji Obara had become a regular presence in Tokyo's nightlife, especially in Roppongi. And before Lucie Blackman ever became a headline, there were already signs that something was wrong. They did not arrive all at once. There was no single moment when the full picture suddenly became clear. Instead, the warnings came in fragments. Women who remembered accepting drinks, women who woke up confused, disoriented, or unable to explain how they had ended in a private room, women who felt that something had happened to them, but could not fully reconstruct the night. For investigators, those kinds of cases were difficult from the beginning. The memories were incomplete. Physical evidence was often limited. Some women were unsure whether they would be believed. Others were foreign, far from home, and unfamiliar with the Japanese language and legal system. And in the world these encounters came from, where alcohol, paid company, and private appointments were part of the environment, suspicion could be blurred by ambiguity. So the reports did not immediately become a single case. They remained separate stories, separate women, separate nights, each one disturbing but difficult to prove on its own. No one yet understood that they might be pieces of the same pattern. Then, in 1992, one case became much harder to ignore. A young Australian woman named Carita Ridgway was in Tokyo when she crossed paths with Joji Obara. Soon after, she was taken to hospital unconscious. Obara used a false name and claimed she was suffering from food poisoning, but her condition was far more serious than that. She had suffered catastrophic liver failure, and after days in hospital, her family made a devastating decision to turn off life support. At the time, the full truth did not come out. Carita's death raised questions, but those questions did not yet become enough to stop him. The case was not understood as part of something larger. It did not expose the hidden archive, it did not reveal the full scale of what investigators would later find. And that is what makes this moment so important. Because years before the world knew Lucie Blackman's name, there had already been a warning. A young woman had died, allegations had existed, memories had gone missing, but the fragments had not yet been connected. Joji Obara remained free. He returned to the same private spaces, the same carefully maintained image, and the same world where money, silence, and certainty could protect him. For years, the pattern continued beneath the surface. And then, in the summer of 2000, another young foreign woman walked into his orbit. This time, her disappearance would not fade quietly. In the summer of 2000, a 21-year-old British woman named Lucie Blackman was living in Tokyo. Like many young foreigners arriving in the city, she had come looking for new experiences, independence, and a different kind of life. To her friends and family back home, Tokyo seemed like an adventure, a place where she could see the world, earn money, meet people, and build something of her own, even if only for a short time. To support herself, Lucie worked as a hostess in Roppongi, at a club called Casablanca. The job was common among foreign women in Tokyo's nightlife at the time. Customers paid for conversation, company, and drinks, and the work existed in a world where boundaries could sometimes appear blurred from the outside. For hostesses, it was also not unusual to meet regular customers before work, for what was known as a dohan, a paid dinner or appointment before returning to the club. Many of these meetings were routine. Most ended without incident. At first, there was no reason to think this one would be any different. On July 1st, 2000, Lucie left to meet a customer. He had offered her money and gifts for spending time with him, and the meeting was presented as another private appointment with a wealthy client. To Lucie, it may have seemed like part of the strange but familiar rhythm of Roppongi hostess work. Conversation, politeness, a meal, perhaps a ride, and then back to ordinary life. She told people close to her that she expected to return later that day, but she never came back. At first, those around her tried to explain it in ordinary ways. Perhaps she had changed plans, perhaps she had stayed somewhere else for the night. Perhaps there had been a misunderstanding. In a city as large and as restless as Tokyo, a missed call or a delayed return did not immediately mean disaster. But as the hours passed, and then the days, those explanations began to collapse. Her phone remained silent. Friends could not reach her. No one had seen her return. People began contacting hospitals, police stations, and anyone who might have known where she had gone. Every attempt led nowhere. Soon, the disappearance became one of the most high-profile missing person cases in Japan. Lucie's family flew from the United Kingdom to Tokyo and refused to let the case fade into silence. They spoke to journalists, appealed directly to the public, held press conferences, and pushed for attention at a time when many missing person investigations slowly disappeared from view. Her face appeared in newspapers and on posters. Her name moved through the media. What had begun as a private family nightmare became an international story. As the pressure grew, investigators began retracing Lucie's final known movements. They examined her calls, her work, her appointments, the people she had met, and the customer she had gone to see the day she disappeared. Slowly, the investigation began to narrow around one name: Joji Obara. By then, detectives already knew of him. His name had appeared before in connection with allegations, complaints, and disturbing questions that had never fully gone away. But this time, the situation was different. This was not only a woman reporting memory loss after a night she could barely remember. This was not a scattered complaint that could be dismissed as impossible to prove. This time, a young woman had disappeared after meeting him. Obara was brought in for questioning, but he denied being involved in Lucie's disappearance. According to his account, he had met her, spent time with her, and then she had left on her own. But investigators could not ignore the pattern forming around him. The more they looked into Obara's life, the more the case seemed to expand beyond a single missing person investigation. His movements raised questions, his properties became important, the older allegations surrounding him began to look less like isolated rumors and more like pieces of a larger picture. Detectives had started by trying to answer one question: what happened to Lucie Blackman? But with every new detail, they found themselves drawn deeper into Obara's hidden world. Eventually, police obtained the authority to search properties connected to him. At first, they were looking for anything that might explain Lucie's disappearance: clothing, personal belongings, documents, traces of where she had gone, or evidence that could connect Obara more directly to her final known hours. What they found instead changed the entire direction of the investigation. Inside one of Obara's properties, detectives discovered a vast collection of videotapes. Not a few recordings, not a small private archive, but a huge number of tapes gathered over years. At first, investigators did not fully understand what they were looking at. Then, they began watching them, and the scale of what they had found became impossible to ignore. The recordings showed women, many women, different faces, different years, different nationalities. Some appeared heavily intoxicated, others seemed barely conscious. Again and again, investigators saw women who were in no condition to understand what was happening around them. And in many cases, there was no sign that they even knew they were being filmed. For detectives, the discovery was not just shocking because of what was on the tapes. It was shocking because of the repetition. The woman kept changing, but the pattern remained. There were too many recordings to dismiss as isolated incidents, too many victims, too many encounters, and too much structure behind what Obara had been doing. The tapes became a roadmap into his hidden life. Investigators began identifying women one by one. Some were located and interviewed. Many described memory loss. Some remembered accepting drinks before suddenly losing consciousness. Others could remember almost nothing about the events captured on the recordings. What had once looked like scattered complaints now began forming a single terrifying picture. According to the evidence, this was not a spontaneous crime. It appeared organized, repeated, and refined over years. It was not one night, one victim or one disappearance. It was a system built around access, drugs, privacy and control. A system that had continued while Obara moved through Tokyo nightlife as a wealthy, polite and familiar customer. And as investigators continued examining the evidence, a more disturbing question began to emerge. If there were this many recordings, how many women had never been recorded? How many had never come forward? How many had woken up confused and ashamed, unable to explain what had happened, and then simply tried to move on with their lives? Then investigators made another discovery, one that would finally connect Joji Obara back to the disappearance that had started everything. The next discovery did not come from another interview, recording, or another witness statement. It came from the ground. In February 2001, investigators were led to the coastal area of Miura, south of Tokyo. The evidence had slowly pulled investigators toward Obara's seaside apartment. Lucie's final calls pointed toward the coast. Photographs and physical traces connected her to one of his coastal properties. There, near the sea, they found human remains. For months, Lucie Blackman had existed in the investigation as an absence, but now that absence had become physical evidence. The search was no longer only about where she had gone, it was about what had been done to her after she disappeared. The forensic examination took time. Every detail mattered. The remains had to be identified carefully, because this was the moment that would either confirm the family's worst fear or leave them trapped in uncertainty even longer. Then the confirmation came. The remains belonged to Lucie Blackman. For her family, it was the answer they had been fighting to find. But it was not the answer they had wanted. Until that moment, there had still been a narrow space for hope that she might be alive somewhere, hope that the story might still end differently. After Miura, that hope was gone. The discovery changed the case completely. It gave investigators the one thing they had been missing since the beginning: proof that Lucie had not simply vanished, left on her own, or disappeared by choice. Whatever Obara claimed, whatever explanations had been offered, whatever uncertainty had surrounded her final hours, Lucie had been found. But even this discovery did not make the case simple. Finding Lucie answered one question, but it opened others that would prove much harder to resolve. How exactly had she died? What could be proven in court? Which parts of the story could be supported by evidence, and which parts would remain trapped in silence between her disappearance and the discovery of her remains? That was what made the case so painful. The truth was no longer completely hidden, but it was still incomplete. Investigators now had the body of a missing woman, a suspect who denied responsibility, and a trail of evidence that pointed towards something terrible, but still had to survive the strict demands of a courtroom. The discovery at Miura became the emotional breaking point of the entire case. It ended the search for Lucie, but it began a new battle. The battle to prove what had happened to her, to connect the evidence into a legal case, and to decide how much responsibility the court could place on Joji Obara. The mystery of her disappearance was over, and the fight for judgment was about to begin. What followed was not a simple trial. By the time the case reached court, Joji Obara was no longer being judged only through one disappearance. Prosecutors were dealing with years of evidence, multiple women, old allegations, medical records, recordings, disputed timelines, and 2 deaths that had come to define the case in the public mind: Lucie Blackman and Carita Ridgway. But the courtroom does not work the same way public outrage does. Suspicion is not enough. Horror is not enough. Even a disturbing pattern is not enough unless each part of it can be proven under the law. That became one of the central difficulties of the Obara case. Many of the women connected to the investigation had little or no memory of what had happened to them. Some incidents were years old. In several cases, physical evidence was limited or gone completely. The recordings showed something deeply disturbing, but prosecutors still had to prove what had happened, when it happened, whether the woman could consent, and what Obara's legal responsibility was in each case. Obara denied many of the accusations against him. His defense challenged the prosecution's interpretation of the evidence and argued that the case against him was built on assumptions, not proof. The trial became long, complicated and painful, especially for the families and victims who had to watch legal arguments break the story into technical pieces. Eventually, the court delivered its judgment. Obara was found guilty of multiple serious crimes against several women, and he was also convicted in connection with the death of Carita Ridgway. For those crimes, he received a life sentence. But the decision did not bring the clean ending many people had expected, because in the first major verdict, the court did not convict him over Lucie Blackman's death. The judges ruled that the evidence was not enough to prove exactly how she had died or to hold him legally responsible for killing her. For Lucie's family, the result was devastating. The man at the center of investigation was going to prison for life, but the court had not given them a full legal answer about what happened to their daughter. But the case did not end there. Prosecutors appealed, and higher court later changed part of the outcome. Obara was found guilty of abducting Lucie and of actions taken after her death. But even then, the court did not convict him of murder. The exact cause of Lucie's death remained legally unresolved, trapped between what investigators believed, what the evidence suggested, and what the court could prove beyond doubt. In the end, the life sentence remained. Joji Obara, the wealthy businessman who had spent years behind the surface of money, education, and politeness, would spend the rest of his life in prison. The hidden world around him had been exposed. Some of the women connected to the case had finally been recognized, and the man investigators believed had moved through Tokyo nightlife for years without being stopped had finally lost the protection of his image. But the verdict was not complete closure. It punished Obara for what the court could prove. It confirmed that the investigation had uncovered something far larger than one missing person case. It gave part of the truth to the public and part of the truth to the families. But it could not answer everything. It could not say with certainty how many women had been harmed. It could not identify every person in the recordings. It could not restore the years when earlier warnings remained disconnected. And for Lucie Blackman's family, it could not fully explain her final hours. The legal battle had ended, but the questions left behind by the case were still much larger than the sentence itself. The legal battle had ended, but the story did not disappear with the final judgment. By then, Lucie Blackman's name had become known far beyond one courtroom, one city, or one family. What began as the disappearance of a young British woman in Tokyo had grown into an international case, followed in Japan, Britain, Australia, and beyond. Her family's refusal to remain quiet had changed the shape of the investigation. They spoke to the press, appealed directly to the public, pushed the case into the headlines, and made sure that Lucie was not reduced to another missing person file waiting quietly on someone's desk. That public pressure had become part of the story itself. It forced people to look more closely at questions many would rather avoid. How quickly are missing women taken seriously? How does a police investigation change when the missing person is foreign, young, and working in nightlife? How many assumptions are made before the facts are understood? And how often does society judge the victim's environment before it understands the danger around her? The Obara case did not destroy Japan's image as a safe country, but it complicated it. It showed that even in a society known for order and low crime, danger could still exist behind polished surfaces, behind money, behind manners, behind private doors, and inside industries where alcohol, status, loneliness, and temporary intimacy all mixed together. Roppongi was not simply neon and glamour anymore. It became a symbol of how easy vulnerability could be hidden inside a place built to look exciting. The case also changed the way many people thought about young foreigners abroad. Lucie had not gone to Tokyo expecting to become part of criminal investigation. She had gone for work, independence, and adventure. And that is what made her story so frightening to the people watching from the outside. It felt close to ordinary life. A young person travels overseas, takes a job, meets new people, trusts the rhythm of the city. And then, one meeting changes everything. In the years that followed, Lucie's name became connected not only to tragedy, but to support for other families facing crises overseas. Out of the pain of her case came a wider mission, helping people who find themselves lost inside a foreign legal system, foreign languages, unfamiliar police procedures, and the helplessness of waiting for news from another country. Her family had experienced that nightmare directly. The legacy that followed was built around making sure others would not have to face it completely alone. But the most unsettling legacy of the case is still the question it left behind. Not only what happened to Lucie Blackman, not only what happened to Corrita Ridgway, but how long the warning signs existed before anyone could see the full picture. There had been women with missing memories, complaints that did not become a pattern, incidents that seemed separate until investigators finally had enough evidence to connect them. And that is the part of the story that still feels unresolved, because it points to something larger than one man. It points to the spaces where victims can disappear without physically vanishing, into shame, uncertainty, disbelief, language barriers, and systems that demand clear evidence from people who were left with broken memories. In the end, Joji Obara was stopped, but the case remains disturbing because stopping him did not answer everything. It did not identify every woman. It did not recover every lost memory. It did not explain why the pattern remained hidden for so long. And it did not erase the possibility that some victims never knew they were part of the same story. That is why the Obara case still matters. Because it is not only a story about one missing woman, one wealthy predator, or one shocking investigation. It is a story about what can happen when appearances are trusted too easily, when fragmented warnings are ignored, and when society understands the pattern only after too many lives had already been changed. If you want to hear more carefully researched true crime stories from Japan and across East Asia, subscribe to East Crime Chronicles. And if there is a case you believe deserves more attention, let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next investigation.